Morning, everybody, and welcome to our fifth Survive and Thrive series webinars. And thank you very much for joining us today. And I'd also like to acknowledge that this series is being sponsored by the Newcastle Permanent Building Society, and I thank you very much for their support on this occasion. While this event is being delivered across multiple locations, I would like to recognise that the Hunter Business Chamber operates across the lands of the Awabakal and Warramai people, and I'd like to pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also any Indigenous people joining us today. A warm welcome to our special guest too, Minister Damien Tudehope, the Minister for Small Business and Finance, and a member of the Legislative Council in New South Wales. And I thank Damien for making himself available, and I'll pass over to him shortly to get proceedings going. I did send an email around to people that were registered this morning. I just wanted to re-emphasise that Damien commented to me directly this morning that the best feedback as far as he's concerned is direct feedback, and we're really hopeful that people have put forward specific comments or questions, and also we're going to allow you the opportunity to talk directly to the Minister if you make that known to us through the chat, and we'll try and accommodate that as we go through. So bear that in mind. There's a lot going on in the Minister's space, and I'm sure he'll allude to some of those things, and his portfolios have been particularly important in the interest of business as we try and manage and navigate our way through the pandemic. So welcome, Damien, and as I said, we'll come back to you very shortly for some opening remarks. Before I do, as I said, I'd again like to acknowledge the support of the Newcastle Permanent Building Society as the major sponsor for this series. We're now going to watch a short video from the Newcastle Perm in respect of their support.
When things change unexpectedly, we adapt. When things get complicated, we adapt. When we need to do things differently, we adapt. At Newcastle Permanent, we're adapting too, by increasing our Hunter-based call centre team to assist you and help give you some financial peace of mind. Because if one thing's certain in these uncertain times, we're here for you, and we're here for good.
The success and well-being of our customers, our people and our community has always been our driving force. As we all work together to manage the impacts of the pandemic for our families and communities, that commitment has never been stronger. Newcastle Permanent's purpose is to help our customers. Since March, we have announced a range of relief measures to assist our customers through the pandemic. We're committed to helping our small business customers adjust their cash flow through this challenging time and supporting them as they prepare and commence recovery. Included in our customer assist packages are reduced business lending, variable interest rates, and fast-tracking requests for increases to existing business overdraft facilities up to an extra $50,000. Whatever the challenges this uncertain time brings, we will remain true to our purpose. Newcastle Permanent will be here for you and here for good, as we have been for 117 years.
Thanks again to the Newcastle Permanent and those words from the CEO in relation to the support that they're offering. So and thanks to Bernadette and the team there at the Newcastle Perm. Just before we move to our discussion with the Minister, just a reminder, you're welcome to leave your video on, but if you start moving around, please maybe turn it off so we're not distracted, and also with the sound as well. And we'll try to facilitate direct questions if you put that up in the chat room and bring you on board to talk directly with the Minister. So bear with us and bear with the technology as we move through this and my lack of knowledge thereof. Minister, so once again, thanks for being with us. You've been very busy. You've been kind enough to visit this region on a number of occasions, and we were able to have you at one of our BDFs last year, which was great. Just before I start, we start into the interactive session. Invite you to make a few opening remarks and where things are at from your viewpoint.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, and it's great to be with you and your members again this morning. It's vastly different than the last time that I spoke to the Hunter Business Chamber, and all the talk then was about a very positive future in terms of business activity and the way that business was perceiving opportunity in the Hunter area, and things that we could potentially do to enhance that activity. Generally, when I start these sessions, the first thing I just have to, I suppose, context all the comments in, all my comments in, is the circumstances in which we find ourselves are predicated on the problem of a health crisis. And notwithstanding that we are now moving to the economic recovery phase of this crisis, it should not be forgotten that the health issue remains in the community. And just to encapsulate what that health crisis is that we have a virus which is a very contagious virus. It has the ability to cause people to die, and we don't have a cure. All the effort to date has been around reducing the contagion rates, and the health officials tell us that when the virus started, the contagion rate was, for every person who got it, the number of people who would also be infected with the disease would be about 1.8. We've got it down below 1 now, and that is the trigger for being able to say that we can deal with this pandemic in terms of the response of the health system. At 1.8, we couldn't deal with it, and we would have had every ICU bed in the state and in the country probably full if that contagion rate continued. And the images which come out of London, New York and Brazil are evidence of what occurs in circumstances where the health system does not cope with the contagion rate. So Australia and New South Wales has done really well in terms of handling the health crisis. So that's the context in which we are today, because we now, because we have over a period of time got the contagion rate down below 1, we are able to say, let's re-engage businesses. And lots of people would have seen the Prime Minister with a 3-step plan for starting to open up businesses, and each state acting on that 3-step plan is adopting its own process for the purposes of getting businesses back and operating. Obviously there are things like, the restaurants which are opening with 10 patrons. There are circumstances where we're getting people out exercising in public spaces and the like. And the gathering of people is starting to gather force. And if you go to most retail shopping centres these days, most shops are open, and there's lots of activity certainly taking place. And I think it's by and large stimulated by the fact that people want to get out and start to engage in life as it previously was. So there are lots of positive signs starting to occur as the economy does start to emerge. However, it'd be negligent of me to suggest that every business is going to survive this process. Any business which has been closed, has no customers for 2 to 3 months, has obligations, whether it be to a landlord, a bank or suppliers, and then has to reopen its doors and try and reignite that business, then that creates its own challenges as we come out of hibernation. Yesterday I had to attend before a public accounts committee of the upper house to as they did an inquiry about the government's response to the crisis. And one thing that emerges out of that is that having an inquiry while we're still in the middle of the crisis is probably problematic. But one thing I do say, and what the inquiry started to ask questions about, was what's the response of business to how the government has handled the pandemic as it exists. We can point to, we've done some good work by the Office of Small Business in gauging the way that small business has said that it perceives the business as recovering. When we first started the survey, the response of a small business was that 17% only of those businesses were confident that they would be able to recover. Now that's pretty discouraging news. When we did the second component of the survey, that got to 32%. And the more recently, we've done the survey again and it has increased again. So businesses are starting to think that, well, we are coming out of it and we'll be able to recover. But there will be a significant number of businesses who will struggle to be able to recover. When I was talking to Bob this morning, one thing I said to him was, I would like to use these webinars, and I've done a series of them now, to get much more of a response by all the people who participate in the webinar, for them to tell us about their business, or tell me about their business, and one of my staff is online and will be taking notes about all this, but to tell us about their business and their reaction to the way that government has supported their business, or things that we could be doing in relation to policy direction or removing red tape or the like, because we don't pretend for one moment that we know all the things that we should do to support small business. I mean, it's only by interacting with businesses that we get ideas. Like I had a session with the Sydney Business Chamber on Monday night, and it was very well attended. And there were some really good ideas about, outdoor dining, the proximity of clearways, rates of DA approvals, and licensing restrictions potentially on outdoor activity, depending on the particular business that was involved. And for me, getting the input of businesses into how the government is going is really beneficial, because it gives us an insight into things that potentially we can change. So I'd be really keen if there are people who are on this session, for them to engage with this process today, to say, this is my business, this is a snapshot of where we are, and here are a few things that we think business or government can do to potentially assist us through the process, or alternatively policy directions that we could take, which would be of benefit. Planning obviously is one area where I think there's an opportunity for government to free up a lot more opportunity for business. We do things like offer small business grants, which have been taken up. And while I'm on that, if there are small businesses out there that haven't looked at the opportunity of taking up a small business grant, those applications close in 9 days' time. So if you haven't done that, your small businesses or your clients, if you're an advisor, should be getting on their bike and taking up those small business grants. We've done a significant amount in terms of getting more business advisors out into the field. One thing that strikes me about the way that the government is reacting to this crisis is that there is so much information out there, whether it's a JobKeeper package, a job seeker package, or a payroll tax or land tax, rent renegotiation, applications for grants and the like. There is just like an announcement every day. Yeah. The potential is for small businesses to be just stuck in the headlights, to sort of say, well, I don't know what to do. And one of the things that I'm really very keen on is for small business to get advice. Advice takes many forms, but the advice should be in terms of A, what is available to me? B, do I need to restructure my business to be able to get through this? Yeah, are there things that I can be doing with my suppliers, my bank, my landlord, for the purposes of making sure that I have some cash flow and able to reopen the doors, or alternatively get a new customer base, or take advantage of new opportunities? Or are there potentially just advice that I need to get about exiting the business because it's not going to be working for me? I noticed one of the ads that came on, and I think it was Newcastle Permanent who put on, saying that the banks and financial institutions are there and have been available to help. And one of the unsung stories in this is that we look to government often for support in times of crisis. So I want to give a bit of a shout out for some of the banks and lending institutions who have really come to the party in this. As much as government can do stuff, we rely on banks and landlords and suppliers to also come to the party to give small business a bit of a boost. And banks have deferred mortgage repayments, most of them for 6 months, so as to give businesses an opportunity, and have shown a willingness to be able to talk to small business about the extent to which they will be able to give them some leverage to make sure that their business recovers. However, the reality is, and this goes back to the issue of advice, there comes the time when whatever concessions government has made, whether it's JobKeeper or JobSeeker or grants or deferment of payments, where that finishes and business has to face the stark reality of how am I going to move past this process with a view to making sure that I can return to the level of business confidence and earning the income which I had previously earned. So with just those sort of comments, I'll finish, because I'm really keen to get some input about your experience and potentially some of the things that government can be doing to assist business through this. And I'll be even interested to the stories that potentially business advisors can tell about how businesses have potentially repivoted, how they've restructured, and alternatively taken advantage of opportunities with government. So I'm happy to throw it open to you guys to certainly ask questions and make suggestions about things you think we can be doing better, and opportunities that you think the government can make available to small business going forward.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And so, yes, once again to the audience, throw it up on chat or get our attention somehow, and we'll throw across. Just before, one of the comments we did get back this morning was, starting on a positive, was the notice of one of the businesses of the great transformation that Service New South Wales has gone through, and that obviously started well before the COVID thing, and it's become a real portal for people to get access to information and advice as a start point in relation to the crisis. It struck me that there's a lot of other machinery that's now being put in place by government that has just cut out so many highways and byways that we've had to navigate in the past to get information or get advice back to you, such as the weekly meetings with Treasury that the New South Wales or Business New South Wales participate in, that we're able to feed up in. And I'm sure you've now got direct feeds through your various networks that are now providing you with contemporary information, given that things are moving so quickly. We're sort of interested in how much of that you think will survive, as opposed to going back to some of these old traditional things of the machinery of government, which often prove to be very, very slow, very bureaucratic, and sometimes cumbersome. And really understanding from now on how business can interact with government. Will the Service New South Wales portal, for example, be the main point for us to be able to start that process?
Well, Bob, that's a really good point, I must say. I think when I spoke to your chamber last year, I was singing the praises of the culture change which had gone on in government, which was largely driven by Service New South Wales, and we now have a Minister for Customer Service, and that's a part of that culture change. And let me give you a really direct example of how that works. One of the packages that we have, in fact, adopted, which was, I suppose, delivered by the National Cabinet, is the set of, or the National Code of Principles relating to negotiation of, or renegotiation of retail and commercial leases. Now, generally, government doesn't like getting involved in the agreements between businesses. The fact if a landlord makes an agreement with his tenant, then that's their business and government shouldn't be interfering in that. However, in this circumstance, government is compelled to set down a code and a set of principles, and I, in fact, have signed off a regulation which allows for the renegotiation and mediation of those lease arrangements. And what I would say in relation to that is, initially the portal for the mediation of those agreements or arrangements was through the Office of Small Business. The level of inquiry we've had in relation to that, however, has been about 6,000 odd calls relating to how the lease could be renegotiated. And what we have done is transitioned those calls to Service New South Wales, or Customer Services, I call it, and they concierge all those, or triage all those calls in through Service New South Wales on the basis that they say we will prioritise the really important ones and make sure that we get those issues mediated quickly. And they refer the ones that need quick mediation then to the Office of Small Business for the purpose of enabling the mediation to occur. But the point that I make is that Service New South Wales deals with that on the basis of wanting to make sure that the people who are engaging with the government come out of this experience the right way, and they don't come out thinking, you know, it's going to take me forever to get a response or whatever. Even in relation to small business grants, we've got those money into people's accounts very quickly. I had dinner last week. You're might be surprised by this, but for the first time in my life, I booked out the whole restaurant. They could only take 10 people, but 10 people was the booking for the restaurant. But the owner of that restaurant, who had been required, had closed, got a small business grant in his account within 5 days of making an application. And I think that should be the model that government wants to adopt going forward, that they put the customer at the centre of everything that they do. In the same way as business puts the customer at the centre of what it does, there's no reason why government shouldn't do the same thing. And I think it is one of the success stories of what we have achieved in government. Anyway, let's hear from some of the people who are... Yeah,
sure. So there's a comment here which is very particular, that one of our members is involved with catering to large events, and still a question mark about, you know, while they're not on, there's no income. Not sure when they'll be able to start this process again. I mean, I know the government's in a bit of a tussle with that internally, but it probably comes back to the question of the health advice. Is that the case? And is there any insights as to when we might see that being relaxed?
Yeah, but it's the whole question of large public gatherings. How quickly do you bring those large public gatherings back on? Obviously, the more people you've got confined in one space, or the greater the likelihood, if one or two people are infected with COVID, then that contagion has a huge opportunity to spread. If you look at the beginning of this problem, there are generally spikes as a result of gatherings of people. Some people may recall that there was a wedding at Stanwell Heights on the south coast where one person attended the wedding and 30 other people got infected with COVID. The Ruby Princess was, again, a gathering of people in a confined space. There's a similar spike at a nursing home and another one at a meat factory down in Victoria. So large gatherings are real problems for us and the rugby league will tell you that they want people back at rugby league games and the like. I would have to suggest that to get large outdoor gatherings going again will probably be in the third phase of the lifting of restrictions. I think there's going to be some announcements probably today about increasing numbers of people at restaurants and the like and hotels, but the large public outdoor gatherings will probably be some time away yet. I'm not in that decision-making process, but it is dependent upon the health advice that the Premier and Deputy Premier get in respect of where we're going with the lifting of restrictions. Some of the big concerns we have of people on trains, of course, and transport, certainly in Sydney and probably in Newcastle as well. If you get a lot of people on a train, how are we actually dealing with that? So there's no real answer for the people who put on large events, except that they are the biggest health concern that we have.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And it sounds like we've got to be on our best behaviour to prove our capacity. It sounds before we get back to that point. Steve Waite from the Newcastle Business Centre has noted that particularly with some announcements recently about Business Connect and the service that they offer, which keys into the point that you were making about the access to business or access that business has to advice services and so on and so forth. Is that still, these things top of mind for government? There seems to be a real need for a multiplicity of different advice that businesses are looking for. And I guess, Steve's business or the Business Centre is an interesting case in point, given that it's a focal point for a number of those concerns that have been brought that are relevant to our community. I don't know if you want to say something, Steve, but otherwise, Minister, how you see the interaction with those very important hubs that provide those services.
Good morning, Steve. Lovely to have you on board.
Morning.
Well, one of the things that the Treasury has done is recognise the importance of the advice industry, and certainly the business advice and financial advice. And we've increased the number of BizConnect advisors because certainly I think there's no doubt that this is the time that businesses need advice about opportunity, about restructuring, financial restructuring, and those things that they can avail themselves of. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Steve, about your experience in terms of how businesses are coping up your way.
Yeah, Minister, I think you're right about the plethora of information that came out from about March 13 onwards, from stimulus phase 1 through to where we are now. And much of our work, which has been greatly appreciated by businesses, is been in demystifying and helping people navigate through exactly where they're at in regards to eligibility, understanding their cash flow, understanding how to adapt and modify their business. And no better way to do it, we've found, than us being able to provide that through the highly regarded just one-on-one support, being with another human. Although we're doing it via Zoom or webcast, it's just having someone to be there with you through that. So I just want to acknowledge and thank you for your support, because that's going to allow us to help many, many more businesses over the next 12 months, when we know from September 27 onward, with the predicted demise of JobKeeper and I guess debt coming into business. It's going to be vital again that we're there to help people, and we really value the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, well, and thank you very much for all you do. But I think that point about you've identified a specific date in September, and it's a difficult thing, I must say, that when you actually pick dates like that, because it doesn't mean that the crisis is over, and certainly the health crisis I don't see as finishing in September. And certainly the impact on business won't finish then. So government will need to be agile in terms of how it responds to issues relating to business. I know someone made an observation and sort of said, where do you see the future of business? And one of the things that I encourage people to do is look at the Productivity Commission's report, and also the report or the blueprint prepared by the New South Wales Chief Economist. And what we are really focused on is how do you stimulate the market? And one of the things during drought and bushfire that we stimulated the market with was through infrastructure investment, but more importantly, potentially, is the recognition of the opportunities for startups and innovation hubs to contribute towards economic activity. And one of the things that the Chief Economist says is the future of New South Wales is our ability to contribute to innovation. And there is an innovation hub I know in Newcastle, and there's one just about attached to every university in the state. But they all are in fact attracting lots of small startup businesses, not all of which will necessarily be boom businesses, but some will be massively geared to take advantage of new technologies, new innovation, and new opportunities near innovation hubs to contribute to the economy going forward. And whether it's in climate activities, whether it's in technology or the like, I think that there is we ought to be looking at and encouraging and supporting businesses that want to go down that route.
There's another, just in keys into that, Minister, the point being made about plans to stimulate innovation and new trajectories for small business. And obviously the government's quite occupied at the moment with direct assistance to a large number of businesses where possible to keep employment on foot. But one of the things that's been pointed out in this comment that has suffered is a lot of the grants rounds and processes that have been in place for a long, long time are at the moment have been suspended around tourism and Restart New South Wales and so on. Do you see the opportunity for those to be regenerated, or is the budget difficulties that might have come as a consequence of giving out under other programs going to cause delays in that regard?
Well, there are two things I would say about that. The government recognises that two of the biggest support units of the New South Wales economy are tourism and education. So in terms of stimulus package to revive the economy, packages designed to support the tourism industry and the education sector are going to be front and centre of how we stimulate the economy, together with, of course, infrastructure projects which are shovel ready to actually start. So the identifying of things that are job creators are the things that are front and centre of the government's mind, because when JobKeeper finishes, the potential is for lots of people to be unemployed. And that's exactly what we want to try and counter. The whole package was put in place to try and keep people in jobs. When it finishes, we want the same people to still be in jobs. And that means that we've got to stimulate certainly the tourism sector, and how we do that, whether it's through a grants process going forward or alternatively some other means. But I can 100% say that education and tourism are front and centre industries which support the New South Wales economy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I appreciate that there's a lot of wheels still turn into that space. There's a comment in here acknowledging that the efforts that some of the federal assistance has made, particularly with JobKeeper, but it was yesterday. It's a federal thing, I know, but just the business is curious as what your position might be in relation to the decision that was handed down about the casual workforce change and the 25% levy being paid and that perhaps being reverted and even being written back. As state government obviously looking closely at that and will come out with a position at some stage?
Well, I've got to be a bit careful here. I'm not the Minister for Industrial Relations.
Okay.
but having said that, there is obviously an impact on small business if we change, or this decision changes the way that those small businesses have been operating. Now, that's it's self-evident that it may have a significant impact on lots of small businesses who employ casual labour, and they will need to look at that decision significantly. I would anticipate that if an employer group or whatever appeals that decision, then I heard Christian Porter talking about it last night, and he said the Commonwealth Government would definitely seek to intervene if in fact there was an appeal to the High Court, and I would anticipate that the New South Wales Government would have a view in any High Court proceedings relating to a review of that decision. Now, that's not to say that we ought to be deprecating the contribution of the casual employee workforce, but it means that we can't kill a whole lot of potential other jobs because of the way that we have made this decision and imposed a further obligation on small business.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that it's a very broad topic, that one, and a lot more to go. Wayne Deemer's made the comment, and it's been in the news a bit lately as well, about the role of that manufacturing's, the spotlight it's come under, and some organisations, and one that Wayne works for, Amp Control's done particularly well in a particular sphere, but we've also seen others pivoting to help in relation to the efforts that are going on now. But the question is now is into the future. And as Minister for Small Business, I guess, we in the Hunter have a lot of very small manufacturing and businesses in that sector that that would love to have a certain future, and to know that whether or not there's going to be any particular government intentions or policies that might come out of this that look at the future based on the experience over the last couple of months, and how we can facilitate further growth in what could become even a more important sector than it has been in a relative sense over the last few years. So have you made any observations or got any comment in relation to the small business sector in manufacturing industry?
Well, manufacturing, let's be absolutely blunt about this. If in fact there are restrictions placed on imported goods or whatever from China, or delays of goods coming from China, then there is certainly an opportunity for the manufacturing industry in Australia to take advantage of that. There was a story told to me by one outdoor furniture manufacturer who said that they had gone back into manufacturing because they could no longer get supplies out of China. Now, they identified that this was an opportunity for a business in Australia to be much more out there in the manufacturing world, and to say that whenever business is uncertain, the way to combat uncertainty potentially is to say, well, maybe I can do it and fill the void which is created or has been created by the crisis. Now, Wayne, I don't know what business you're in, but I have to say that I think that there has never been, and this is like some other politicians talk, but never been a better opportunity. I think Malcolm Turnbull used that expression, but there's never been potentially a better opportunity than at least to consider whether your business can be involved and take advantage of manufacturing opportunities and become a supplier to Australian retailers. I'm convinced of that, and whether it is in conjunction with the new airport out at Western Sydney or the like, we are wanting to attract certainly new innovation industries and advanced manufacturing industries in those areas, but even in respect of the what I call the standard manufacturing industries, I think there's also a massive opportunity. A lot of that, of course, depends upon federal government policy making rather than state government policy making. What state governments can do, of course, is make sure that small businesses and manufacturing industry gets cheap power, reliable power, potentially a better tax system. And one of the things that the government is looking at is, in response to the crisis, is getting a better tax system so that we've got a better revenue base, a more reliable revenue base, potentially than we've got at the moment. Now, I will bet that there's not a person on this call who pays payroll tax, or this Zoom session doesn't payroll, that doesn't think that that's an appalling tax. I probably share that view, and yet it's probably one of the biggest revenue raisers for the state. So how do we have a better tax system which recognises the fact that potentially payroll tax is a regressive tax? Now, they're the opportunities which arise for government out of this sort of crisis. And if you want to support manufacturing industry, make it cheaper for them to survive. And if they've got to employ people to be involved in manufacturing industry, don't tax them as much. But anyway, they're no doubt ongoing.
No, that's provoked some comments just along those lines, and it's one that very close to the Chamber's heart. And the idea of taxing people who want to employ people. So that's very heartening to hear that perhaps in the big reform piece that comes out of this, that might be a feature. I've got time for one more comment, and it was one that was made prior to the start of the session, was just about this, Minister, the way that the state, parts of the state are anxious to open up earlier than what others might be, and there's been comment in the press from various people about the opportunity that some regional areas where COVID has virtually been non-existent, anxious to open up earlier and in differential rates and opportunities to other parts of the state.
Yep.
Have you got some just general comment that can be offered so people who understand the context of why the government's adopting the approach that it is?
And I get that the Deputy Premier shares the view of those people who say, well, regional areas are paying a bit of a price for a problem which exists principally in the metropolitan areas. The only thing I say in response to that is this. If one person with COVID goes to a regional area, does the health system or the hospital in that regional area have the intensive care unit capacity to deal with that outbreak? And I think that's probably what exercises the mind of the Premier in making decisions about whether this is a statewide approach to lifting restrictions, or whether you can lift restrictions in some areas and not in other areas. Because if someone goes to Newcastle or to a town in the Hunter Valley and infects 20 people, 30 people, and there is a number of those who have then to be admitted to intensive care units, do we have the regional health system in place to be able to deal with it? Now, there will be some regions where the answer to that is obviously yes, but there will be plenty where the answer would be no, we don't have that ability. And that creates its own strains and potentially health risks not only to the individual regional community, but also to the health capacity of that region. And we've got to also remember that if you look at other countries in the world, people die from this disease. Or I've heard some commentary that says, it's only old people that die. Well, that's just not true. There are younger people that do die and are impacted by it. And I know that there are some communities who are very fearful of outbreaks or contagions in their area. However, I do understand the argument that there are lots of regional towns where they've had no cases of COVID, and they say, well, why should our tourism industry be infected? But I think the overwhelming position of the government has got to be is that we have a statewide response rather than a postcode by postcode response.
Okay, thank you, Minister, and appreciate that because yes, it is important that we don't want unwanted gifts of visitors bringing to the regions that are showing up some resilience, or at least not the experience that has been the case in some of the other areas. That's all we have time for today, based on the schedule that we set. So I do, on behalf of everybody, want to thank you most sincerely for being with us and taking time out of your busy schedule, and do appreciate you making yourself available, because I know that you're also doing this right around other regions of New South Wales, and Hunter region being a pretty significant one in terms of the state. Certainly the issues and the examples that we have here are a real mix, because we're lucky enough to have a very diverse economy, and I know that other regions of New South Wales are more confined to that tourism and hospitality area. So it's interesting to see how they respond, and thank you for being part of this discussion today. So thanks, Minister. Before I close, I just want to make a few announcements. So with our upcoming schedule for more speakers in this series is, I think, on your screen. For anyone who's interested, please register. Andy Penn, the CEO of Telstra next week, then Tanya Constable, the CEO of the Minerals Council of Australia, and then an industry leaders panel discussion on June the 10th. So we'll look forward to your participation in those. And once again, my sincere thanks to the Newcastle Permanent for their sponsorship and support of this series. Once again, in closing, thank you, Minister. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. We do appreciate any feedback, comments, questions, improvements, or whatever that you might have in mind for this series. Only too happy to take them on board as we keep navigating the impacts of the pandemic and the virus. And thanks again for your participation and interest on this occasion.